No. Roger, I don't want to just take off and lay around the damn beach with you. I'm sick of Miami and have more important things to do than traipse all around the country with you. That's all you want to do anymore. We're young. We need to live it up before it's too late. I'm sick of you telling me I can't go out with my friends. I have a life, and if you want to share it, you need to change your ways. Just because I agreed to marry you doesn't give you the right to tell me I have to go on trips with you or I have to stay home and not go dancing and partying with my friends. God damn it, Roger, I'm not some 40-year-old soccer mommy who has nothing better to do than haul a bunch of kids around. I have better things to do than sit around my house and visit on the phone or barbecue on the weekends. I'm young and I need to party. Roger felt his stomach knot up as he listened to Cynthia Vanderbilt, his fiancée. It had taken him over a year to get over the breakup of his last romance and losing his parents in their auto accident. Cynthia brought him out of his depression and made him glad to be alive once more. He had met her by accident one day in the building he worked in on Wall Street. He had been late for a meeting and she had too. They were rushing for the elevator and she tried to beat him through the door. She rushed past him from behind and brushed against him, causing them both to drop items they were carrying for their meeting. Instead of one of them getting the sole remaining space on the elevator, neither of them made that car because they had to stop and pick up their charts and briefcases. Roger had apologized profusely and helped her to pick up everything even though it was her fault they dropped their documents and briefcases. They both explained why they were late and caught the next elevator. When they got to the 25th floor, Roger turned left for his meeting and Cynthia turned right. At that point they had not even exchanged names. Roger made it to his meeting room and saw at least that he was not the last person to arrive. He hurried to set up his easel and flip charts, then checked to be sure his PowerPoint presentation was set up properly and ready to go. Roger's boss came into the room and looked around. He frowned, then said, "Roger, for some reason the other representative from Jones and Bancroft is late. I have called her office and they told me she left their office early enough to get here on time. Everybody just hang loose until we see what the problem is." As the managing partner turned to leave the room, the woman Roger had bumped into came bustling past him and into the room. She almost knocked him down as she had Roger in the elevator. She was red as burgundy wine with embarrassment. She stopped just inside the room and saw everyone standing or sitting waiting on her. She gave a slight smile and said, "I'm so sorry to be late. I was rushing for the elevator and some bumpkin ran into me. I think he must have just fallen off the potato wagon. You could cut his hillbilly drawl with a knife. He was blocking the door to the elevator and bumped into me when I tried to get past him. I dropped everything I was carrying and had to pick it up. When I got to this floor I got turned around and went the wrong direction when I exited the elevator. I hope I didn't cause too big a problem for you all." Mr. Goldstein, the managing partner, smiled and said, "No real problem at all, Cynthia. You're the last one of your team to arrive and all my team is here, so let's just get started." He pointed at Roger and said, "This is our vice president for new issues, Roger Dyer. He'll make a short presentation, then we'll answer any questions you may have. As far as we can determine, the publicity associated with the new issue of your company's bonds and the coupon rate has resulted in an oversubscription. Since the desire for the issue is so high, we might consider raising the amount of the offering or selling them at a premium. In fact, that is the main point we want to discuss with your team." Roger remembered looking up at the beautiful woman standing staring daggers at him. He smiled and walked to his podium, turned to face the rest of the room and said in his best country drawl, "Well, if everyone will take your seats, we can get started now. Ms. Vanderbilt, I want to apologize once again for our mishap at the elevator. I just didn't understand how important it was that you got onto it first. After all, anyone knows someone stepping into an elevator should jump out of the way of a juggernaut heading for a collision with them. I guess I had better get the eyes in the back of my head checked so I can see you from now on." Roger waited for the laughter to die down, then began his presentation. He smiled inwardly at the deep red hue and obvious embarrassment on Cynthia's face. He knew he shouldn't have said what he did. She acted like most of the other women he met here in the city. They thought they had the best and the most sought-after body. She came across as arrogant and high-maintenance, and he didn't like that type of woman. She came across as arrogant and high-maintenance, and he didn't like that type of woman. Both the girlfriends he had after he moved to New York had been like that, and he was through with that type of woman. Sometimes he wondered why he ever wanted to move away from the farm. No amount of money was worth the hassle he went through some days. He was disgusted with the city for so many reasons. He had been raised to believe you succeeded on your own merits, your own hard work. It seemed here in the city you succeeded by backstabbing your friends and co-workers, by making the competition look bad instead of by working to make yourself look good. He hated the fake friendship and camaraderie, the mandatory parties and social functions. Truthfully, he was about ready to quit his damn job and move back home where he could live a good life with real people. He had enough money saved and invested he could live well on a lower-paying job back in his home area. Roger smiled and began his presentation. He had the numbers in line and, like many Wharton MBAs, he knew his stuff forwards and backwards. Many times he saw the shock and admiration in his audience's eyes as he answered their questions. One of the men from the company issuing the bonds was a sharpshooter. Roger could see his anger seething below the surface as he turned aside his verbal jabs or his answers made him look bad. Roger felt his presentation went well, and from the way his boss looked so did he. Finally everyone agreed on the changes to the offering. They instructed the responsible parties to complete and file the requisite paperwork and get the issue placed. Cynthia remained seated after the meeting broke up. She pretended to be arranging her files and placing them back into her briefcase. She was very slow and methodical. It was obvious she was delaying her departure. Finally she and Roger were the only two persons in the room. She looked up at him and stood. Roger watched as she walked toward him with a guilty childlike look on her face. When she was near him she stopped and put her hand gently on his forearm. "Mr. Dyer, I am sorry for the way I behaved both when we ran into each other and when I came into the room today. I am truly sorry. I was so nervous I dithered too long in my office then I could not get a cab. Then when I got here I rushed to the elevator and tried to brush past you so I would not have to wait for another one. I caused the problems and then I didn't have the decency to fess up when I got here. Please, since it's past quitting time, can I take you out for a drink and make it up to you?" Roger had every intention of telling her to forget it and to walk out of the room. He surprised himself when he heard his voice agreeing to go with her. That was the beginning of their romance. It was after 2 a.m. when he stumbled into his apartment that evening and he was besotted with Cynthia Vanderbilt. He had learned she was a very distant relative to the Vanderbilts and was a very driven woman. They had exchanged addresses and phone numbers that evening. Cynthia, Roger had already learned not to call her anything but Cynthia, had agreed to a date the following Friday before they went their separate ways that night. Over the next year Roger found out Cynthia was a party animal, a socialite and, like his other New York girlfriends had been, she was high maintenance. Several times he tried to break it off but he just could not do so. He was in love despite his dislike of some of Cynthia's likes and desires, some of her habits and mannerisms. It was obvious by her actions and statements that she felt she was better than many of the people she was forced to interact with. He was embarrassed many times when they were out by the way she treated people who served them. In spite of her many shortcomings, Roger was empty when she was not with him. He could not get enough of her. She was so special when she laughed and flirted with him, when she loved him. Finally he decided he had to have all of her all the time and he asked her to marry him. Much to his surprise she hesitated. They had been lovers for 9 months by that time and had lived together for 6 months. She professed to love him but she took over a week to agree to marry him and he had to ask her repeatedly before she finally sighed and said, okay, I'll marry you. Geez, you whine about it like a little boy." Roger was hurt by her comment when she accepted his proposal. To this day he did not know why he let it pass. For the last 3 months Cynthia, and that was another thing he did not like about her. It was Cynthia, never Cindy or Cyn, had been getting more and more difficult to be with. She refused to stay home with him. Many evenings she would not even come home until after midnight. Other evenings she would come home from work and clean up, change clothes and go out again to meet her friends for various reasons. Roger was almost never invited to join her any longer because she told him he was a spoilsport. She rarely agreed to go anywhere he wanted to go or visit anyone he wanted to visit. One time she had even said, "Honestly, I don't know why I put up with your country attitude. This is the Big Apple country boy. Get a life, go out, party and live a little." Roger obtained the name of spoilsport because he took exception to the way she danced and acted with many of the men she met at the bars and affairs she or they attended. He told her she was an engaged woman and the way she acted in the bars and with her friends were not appropriate for an engaged woman or a married one. Of course, that was one of the reasons he had been excluded from her nights out lately. He had followed her a time or two and never saw her do anything totally outrageous, but many of her actions made him uncomfortable from a fiancé's perspective. Many of the mannerisms he found so attractive and endearing during their early courtship now made him uncomfortable because she was still flirting and using them with other men. Roger shook himself and turned his mind from his memories to once again address his fiancée Cynthia. He felt his lips press together and jaws clench. He forced himself to relax, then he began speaking. He said, "Cynthia, you have been acting like a spoiled brat and a selfish dam now for 3 months. We need this time away to reconnect and relax. I know both of us have high-pressure jobs and we have to work long hours, but we can't go on like this. It's only 6 weeks until our wedding and we need to reconnect with each other to see if this is truly what we want. We need this week away to fix our relationship. I'm scared it will not last if you don't change your outlook. In fact, I am not sure we are not irreparably broken now. When you agreed to go last week, I made all the reservations. Hell, you even packed your suitcase yesterday and now you tell me you aren't going? The limo will be here any time. We are going and we are going to settle this once and for all." Roger grabbed Cynthia's hand and pulled her to the front door of their condo. He handed her the suitcase she was using. He stepped to the door, opened it, picked up his suitcase and her overnight bag, then ushered her out. When he turned from locking the door, he saw the limo waiting and the driver helping Cynthia into the back. Roger walked up and handed the bags he was carrying to the driver and started to get into the limo. He heard Cynthia talking on her cell during all this. She was saying, "He's being a total bad about the whole thing. I've had it with his crap. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm looking forward to it." Cynthia smiled and continued, "Great, see ya there. At least I'll get something out of this week." Cynthia looked up at Roger with anger in her eyes as she closed her phone. She did not say a word as they rode to the airport. The whole flight to Miami was filled with silence. The only time Cynthia spoke was when absolutely necessary. Roger felt his anger build until he could barely hold it inside. He was ready to admit this was a very bad idea and that his marriage might be in danger of never occurring. He decided if she didn't improve her attitude in the next couple of days he would ask for his ring back and end it. He absolutely refused to put up with crap like Cynthia was dishing out. When they arrived at their resort and got settled in, Roger suggested they go out for supper and dancing. At the mention of dancing, Cynthia's eyes lit up and she got a huge grin on her face. She quickly agreed and asked where they were going. Roger told her, then suggested she go clean up, then he would shower while she dressed. Roger walked into the bedroom after his shower and heard Cynthia on her phone. She said, "Yeah, supper, then we'll be at the beach club for dancing after." "Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it." Cynthia giggled and continued, "Yeah, doing it like this is so exciting. I just can't wait to see his face when it goes down. I get such a charge out of doing it like this, it makes the whole damn time worth it almost." "Well, see you when we get back." Roger felt a little better when he heard her say she was looking forward to the night. He felt some of the knots relax in his body and turned back to the sitting room to finish dressing while he waited for Cynthia. He did wonder what she was planning that she was so excited about. From the sound of her conversation, Cynthia might be planning a surprise for him. He hoped so. Conversation at the meal was strained but somewhat pleasant. It appeared Cynthia was looking forward to the dancing, and that made Roger happy. She also said she was really looking forward to the night after the dance and to the rest of the week. They got to the club and danced several dances. A time or two other men asked Cynthia to dance. She was always polite and asked if she could. Roger grudgingly gave his permission. By the end of the evening, Cynthia and one of the men had quit asking him if she could dance with the stranger. She was almost dividing her time between Roger and the other tall, well-built man. Roger felt uneasy at that, first because the man looked slightly familiar, and secondly because they seemed much too interested in each other, much too familiar with each other. Finally, near 1 a.m., Roger convinced Cynthia to return to their resort. She had just seemed to drift off to sleep lying in his arms. Her attitude worried Roger, but he let his worries fade as he drifted off into a deep slumber. The next morning Roger awakened late. He saw by the clock it was after 10 a.m. Cynthia was not in bed. He walked into the sitting area of the condo and she was not there. After more search he found her purse missing too. Finally he decided she had gone out for breakfast or something, but besides being worried he was upset. She could have waited on him or even awakened him if she was in a hurry. He sighed and thought to himself, this is just another indication that things are going badly wrong. She would have never done this a few weeks ago. We were inseparable and always waited on the other for breakfast on the weekends or on a trip. I have a lot more repair to do than I thought. As the day wore on, Roger got more and more upset. Cynthia did not call. She did not come back for lunch. Roger decided she had gone shopping, but then she did not come back for supper. He stayed up until after midnight and she still had not returned. Finally he called the police, but they had no information on her. He was told he could not report her missing for at least 24 hours. He had a sleepless night. The next morning Cynthia was still missing and Roger reported her as such to the police. He gritted his teeth and called her parents. Roger was very surprised when her father said, "Oh, I wouldn't worry about it, Roger. I'm sure everything is fine. Why don't you just enjoy your trip and relax?" At the time Roger was talking to her father, Cynthia was laying on her back giggling in another hotel room down the block from the hotel Roger was in. After she heard Roger end the phone call with her father, Cynthia turned to the man who was sucking on her breasts. She pulled him up and gave him a deep sensuous kiss. He grinned when he felt her pulling him over her for the third time that day. The tall blonde man did not even know Roger, but he hated him. He had struggled all his life to get ahead and he hated people like Roger, and, in truth, like Cynthia. He felt he fought for everything he had and they just had it handed to them because they came from family or from a good college. Cynthia was not the first woman he had stolen from men like Roger, but if she was as rich as he thought she would be the last for a while. He fully intended to marry her and live like he felt he was entitled. When a richer girl came along he would trade up. He just hoped he didn't have to sign a pre-nuptial agreement when he married Cynthia. He had been dating her now for several months and was sure he could talk her into marrying him when the time came. Roger stayed in Miami the whole week as planned, hoping to find out something about Cynthia. He phoned her parents and all the friends whose phone numbers he had over and over, hoping they had heard from her. Some of Cynthia's friends were evasive, even abrupt when he talked to them. Many did not even answer their phones. He had no luck finding her. Most of the people he phoned said they did not know they had even left town. Finally, the Thursday morning before he was to return home, Roger called her parents once more to report he still knew nothing. That morning he was surprised when her parents seemed upset with his call. The first morning they had been as frantic as he had been. The calls he made after his first report of her going missing, they had seemed strained, and he decided they were worried enough they weren't themselves. One of her friends laughed when he called her to ask about Cynthia. She then said, "Well, that sounds like Cynthia." She then just hung up her phone. Roger packed both bags and returned to New York. He was surprised when he packed Cynthia's bag to find she had brought almost no cosmetics and only some of her older clothes and swimwear. The day he returned to work he looked like hell. He was totally ineffective. His boss asked him what the problem was, and when he told him he laughed. All he would say was, "Welcome to the club, boy." After he got back to New York he once again checked with all of Cynthia's friends he could find. Some of them looked like or said they were sorry, but none of them seemed too worried about Cynthia. Many of them would not look him in the face when he talked to them, and many looked guilty when he saw them in person. He even called her employer and was told they were sorry, but they couldn't tell him anything about Cynthia. This statement bothered him. He was never passed on from the operator. It was almost as if they were expecting his call and told to run interference. When he tried to dial her desk directly he got a voicemail message that, "Ms. Vanderbilt is away from her desk right now. Please leave a message after the beep." He left a message but his call was never returned. Finally Roger decided to watch Cynthia's office. The third evening he stood outside watching the door. His heart broke. He felt himself burn with the heat of his rage. Cynthia came out the door walking with a tall, well-built blonde man. Her arms were wrapped around his left arm and she was gazing rapturously up into his eyes as they walked. When they stopped to hail a cab she stood on her tiptoes and gave him a deep kiss. Roger recognized him as the man she had been dancing with their first night in Miami. Now he knew. Roger rapidly walked up to Cynthia and her new man. He grabbed her arm and twisted her toward him. He was not exceedingly violent, but he was not gentle with her either. Roger glared at Cynthia and said, "I knew something was wrong, but you should have at least had the courtesy to end our engagement face to face instead of just walking out and leaving me to worry for over a week." Roger grabbed her hand and removed his engagement ring against Cynthia's resistance. She began screaming and trying to close her fist to keep the ring. Cynthia said, "You asshole. I got fed up with your damn whining and complaining. Why wouldn't I move on to a man more in tune with my lifestyle? Now get your hands off me. That's my ring and I intend to keep it. You gave it to me and I have no intention of giving it back to you." Cynthia's new beau had recovered by this time and pushed Roger away from her. Roger turned to him and said, "Back off, asshole. You may be taller than me, but I'll tear you apart if you don't quit with me. I ought to beat you to a pulp anyway for what you did." The man backed away a step and watched Roger as he finished taking the ring from Cynthia. He looked at her and her new fellow and said, "I knew when I first saw you that no sane man should get involved with you, but I just couldn't help myself. I guess I got what I deserved." Roger turned and slowly walked back to the parking garage and his car. All the way he kicked himself mentally because in the back of his mind he had always known Cynthia was like that. He had seen her selfishness, how self-centered she was, all through their courtship and engagement, but had refused to believe it. He now knew beyond a shadow of doubt that he was just a passing fancy, a fling for another conceited party girl. He was angry. He hired a PI to follow her and get information for him. She had already moved into the house of her new lover. Somehow they got pictures of them. Roger boxed up Cynthia's belongings that had been left in his home. While he was boxing them he noticed there did not seem to be as much as he thought there should be. None of what he found could be considered important to her. Only old clothes, no important personal items or business papers were left in his house. He then knew she had came home while he worried over her and taken what she wanted from his house, leaving her old outdated items just as she had at the resort. Roger felt his anger building once again as he considered Cynthia's actions. He was fed up with his job and the assholes he worked with. He was sick of New York and all that lived and worked the Big Apple. He decided to quit his job, sell his condo and move back to his childhood home. It would not be the same with all his family dead and gone, but he still had friends there. He still had a score to settle with Cynthia and her new man before he left, but other than that, he had nothing holding him in New York any longer. Hell, he had even made enough money he could live pretty well when he got back home. Roger decided to tell Cynthia's friends and parents what she had done to him. Hopefully he could make enough of a scandal that her reputation would be tarnished. Maybe he could prevent what happened to him from happening to another man. Then when his condominium sold he would quit his job and leave. Much to Roger's surprise, when he began looking up her friends and family to tell them what Cynthia had done, they laughed at him. Almost every one of her acquaintances admitted they already knew how she dumped him. Haley, one of her female friends that was nicer to Roger than most, apologized to him for not telling him when he had first called. She said, "Roger, I am sorry this happened to you and I can imagine how you hurt, but let it drop. This is just typical Cynthia. You're not the first man she dumped like that. One time she went to France with a man, stayed the whole week with him, then cut out. This is her normal way of ending a relationship when she decides she has gotten everything from it she can. She usually finds a new man, moves in with him, and then just walks away from her old boyfriend without telling him anything. Many times she does it on a trip like she did you. That seems to be her preferred way of ending a relationship. I think she gets a kick out of seeing or knowing how her exes come apart, thinking she has actually been hurt or kidnapped. Most of the dumped men stay gone the entire time, like you did, trying to find her. That gives her time to get what she wants from their apartment, move, and begin to hide her tracks. We all know better than to spill the beans on her because she can be so vindictive. One time one of her friends at work told the man she was dumping she had left him before Cynthia finished moving the personal items she wanted from his apartment. Cynthia worked for months until she manufactured a reason for her employer to fire the tattletale. We are all afraid to rat her out. I am sorry, but I just couldn't take a chance and tell you. My advice to you is to drop it and move on. She has friends all over and she can make life very difficult for you if you cause her trouble. She has a regular stable of men in powerful places. These men jump to help her when she asks, so she won't cut them off or rat them out to their wives. Right now she is happy and content knowing what she did to you and knowing how you suffered. Don't piss her off or she'll get vindictive on you. If she can't hurt you to her satisfaction, she will get some of her powerful lovers to do it for her." Roger was shocked when he heard that and said, "You're kidding." It seemed like it was. "I can't believe Cynthia would do something like that. I admit I was beginning to suspect what she was doing was more than nights out with her girlfriends, but I just can't believe she had lovers all during our engagement." "Believe it, Romeo. I can't give you proof, but all of her friends have seen her with other men during all her dating and engagements. Cynthia is out for Cynthia, and anything that will make things better for her is okay. She never dates with a man unless she thinks she has something to gain. Her goal is to regain the wealth her family had in the past, and she is well on her way to it. I know from talking to her that you spent a lot of money on her, giving her jewelry, expensive clothes, trips, and so forth. During the time she lived with you, she didn't spend hardly anything of her own salary. She bragged that you set up a joint account with her so she could pay household bills and so forth. Didn't you ever wonder why so much of that money disappeared? I bet it didn't get spent, lover." Roger felt ill. He thought about what Haley said and knew she was right. He always had to put more money into the account. When he complained, Cynthia had just blew him off and said things were more expensive now. He was glad now he didn't put all his salary into that account, or she might have spent or taken it all. Roger decided it was a waste of time continuing to inform her family and friends what Cynthia had done. It was obvious that everyone already knew what Cynthia had done and didn't really care. Roger hired a PI firm to follow Cynthia. He had her followed for a month and he requested information on the men and women. He obtained a used computer and began sending emails with pictures of Cynthia and her lovers to everyone he knew who knew her. He always used a public Wi-Fi connection so the message could not be traced to him. When possible, he sent pictures and explanations to the wife or girlfriend of her lovers. If he didn't have their email addresses, he used snail mail. Roger began hearing of marital and relationship troubles in many families who knew Cynthia. Now she was becoming the favorite gossip subject with those who knew her or knew of her. Many of her friends were avoiding her, trying not to get splattered with the storm she had raised. By now it had already been almost 6 months and Cynthia was getting bored with the man that had replaced him. She was once again shopping for a new man. Roger caught her and took pictures of her doing inappropriate things. These pictures were sent to his list of people. He made sure copies of the pictures were given to her new lover. It seems he became very angry with Cynthia. In fact, he hit her and ended up in jail over that. Roger thought that was poetic justice. Cynthia's life began to unravel. Every time she was seen with another man more than once or twice he got a synopsis of her past actions. Many of them dumped her outright. Cynthia was furious that someone would smear her like that, but she could not find out who was doing it. She and her family even hired a PI but had no luck. Finally she lost her job because Roger had caught her having love with two of her superiors and one of her subordinates on company time. Even worse, she was doing it in company offices or at company functions. She had to move back into her parents' home. Roger decided he had done enough to Cynthia. He sent her one final package with copies of most of the pictures and notices he had sent to others. The note on top said it all. You have loved countless men and made their lives miserable as you used them to make yourself feel better or to better your position. Now you not only know what it feels like to some extent, but you have been reduced to living off your parents once more. Hope you have a nice life. Getting even with the man who had stolen Cynthia from him was much easier. Roger felt like he really didn't need to do much to him because he had been used just as Roger and many others had. Had Cynthia not been wearing his engagement ring at the time, Roger might have given the man a bye. He followed him into a bar one night, and after he was half drunk Roger walked up to his table and sat down uninvited. Roger held his hand out to shake. He said, "You may not remember me, but I owe you a lot for what you did for me. I want to thank you." The man took his hand and said, "I don't think I even know you. What do you think I have done to help you?" Roger laughed and said, "Hell fella. You moved in on me and stole my fiancée Cynthia Vanderbilt 6 weeks before my wedding. I can't thank you enough for taking that cheating lying she off my hands before I made a serious error and married her. Too bad you didn't last as long as I did though. She was one of the best pieces of ass I ever had." Recognition flashed across his face and the young man rose from his chair with a roar. He hit Roger, causing him to fall from his chair. Before the other patrons, his friends, or the bouncers could get to him, Roger stood and hit him 3 times. Well, his first punch was a kick to the gonads, but then Roger drove his knee into his face as he bent forward clutching himself. As the young man began to fall, Roger hit him as hard as he could in the face. He heard his jaw break. The man was lying on the floor moaning and clutching himself when Roger bent down toward him. He said, "I'm sorry, old chap. All I wanted to do was thank you for taking that skank off my hands. I'm glad she is gone. Hope you've learned your lesson." Roger walked out of the building before the bouncer could restrain him and before the police arrived. The next morning he read about an altercation at a hot local nightclub. Apparently a Jared Dinwiddie was accosted and badly beaten by an unknown assailant who had escaped. Roger kept waiting on a visit by the police, but one never came. He felt good, sad about his breakup, but glad he didn't land in jail. A few weeks later his condo sold. That same day he gave his notice and quit his job. 2 weeks later Roger loaded what little he was taking with him into his vehicle and left, heading back to his home in the Missouri Ozarks. He was the last of his immediate family and he wanted out of the city. He had not been back to the family farm in almost 10 years, but that was his destination and he was looking forward to getting there. He had no intention of ever leaving his hometown for more than a vacation ever again.